So in this video, if you're watching, you more than likely are feeling like the devil is trying to attack you or trick you and lead you down a false path. And the only thing that I found that's helped me actually get better at avoiding the negativity and the things in life is to really just understand when the devil tries to trick you. Because we know from, the biblical story that Adam and Eve, the first thing that the devil tries to do, and the only thing he's really ever tried to do, is deceive. And if we allow ourselves to be tricked and can't recognize when we are being led down the wrong path, then we'll end up being in situations where, we thought we were doing the right thing, but we ended up hurting somebody, or we thought we were on the right path, but that right path ended up being the wrong one. So the only thing I'm focused on is giving the lessons that I learned. And at the end, I'm going to really talk about the biggest thing that I see the devil doing to trick us today that he has not been able to do with like our parents, our grandparents of like the older generations, the millennials and the Xers or whatever. So yeah, I'm filming in a sauna right now because who's gonna do it if it's not me? I do what I feel like and I'm creative that way. But anyway, getting to the first point is how you see the world. So one of the biggest things that the devil has tried to do to trick us is get us to see the world in a particular way. And you start to really realize this, at least I started to really realize this when I saw so many people who were what I consider to be successful and the people I consider to be unsuccessful. So, I'm getting out of high school and stuff like that, and I'm looking at people who are, successful financially, because when you're a young person, you always looking at the money first. So let's talk financial. I'm looking at someone who's financially successful, and I'm like, man, like what I'm not doing that they're doing, and like what is the person that's unsuccessful doing that the person that is successful won't do? So I need to figure out like what's the differences. And I realized quickly that the devil tries to trick us in how we see the world, because I realized that fundamentally the way that a person who is quote unquote successful and someone who is unsuccessful in the financial sense only see the world in completely opposite ways. The person who is unsuccessful views the world from a short-term perspective. So I saw like people spending money on, useless things, designer clothes, for example, especially as a young adult. If you buy designer clothes with your own money and you don't make a lot of money already, which most people don't who are young adults, it's a stupid decision. There's no way that you can justify buying something that's so expensive if you are just starting out with a modest low income and you're trying to build a bright financial future. But think about it. Who do you see the most in your community, my community, the black community, whatever? Who do you see the most spending the money on designer clothes and value and all this stuff? You see a lot of what you would probably consider unsuccessful people doing that, because, no one cares if you leave a Louis bag to them, when you pass away. But ultimately, a lot of people end up looking at the short-term satisfaction of feeling good because you got Louis or you got Gucci or whatever the brand is. And they never really look at, okay, now that I have this item, did I really like move forward? Because, financial success as it's described is wealth. Wealth is an abundance or of ownership of assets that continually generate you money. So the people who have that long-term perspective, they end up, buying things that they need, buying assets, things that generate them money so that they can actually long-term leave something for their family and their future generations. Because God says that you have to leave an inheritance for your children. And also in the Adam and Eve story, the first thing the devil did was trick Eve and tell her that in the short term, it mattered that she would have the knowledge of good and evil. the knowledge that would make her like, or make them like gods. And that was a really short-term thought process, when long-term, obviously, if you have an all-knowing great being that wants you to be cared for and pretty much have everything except one tree, it only makes sense to think long-term. So really ponder that and make sure you're not tricked by thinking short-term in the areas where you really should be thinking long-term, especially if you don't have the means to exert yourself as much as someone who is, you know, better off financially or any area that you're trying to develop. But the second thing that the devil tries to do to trick you that I want to get into is actually your emotions. When we get into emotions, we have to understand that like emotions can trick you. So emotions are all like the fundamentals of being human, but thoughts actually end up triggering emotions. So people think that we are like logical beings first, but for the most part, we're emotional beings. Every single thought that you have has an underlying emotion to it. Even me, when I'm talking right now, it's like I'm talking about something really important to me, so I'm like really expressive about it compared to if I was talking about like, you know, algebra, y equals mx plus b, or any of that nonsense you learn in school. But like, I'm passionate about this, so I understand that when I have the thought about giving back and talking about how the devil can trick you, that I get passionate about it, and that's just the thought that leads to the emotion. But the issue is that sometimes you can't trust the emotions that come along with the thoughts. For example, I remember when seeing someone who had been through a lot of trauma. You know, they had, you know, in their first relationship ever, it was a girl I had came across, and in her first relationship ever, she actually ended up being, you know, really abused. Like, she left her state, moved to another state with a guy. He was way older than her. It didn't end up in a good way and ended up being in a pretty abusive situation. And that point moving forward, she had really bad anxiety, and she thought that any guy that ever come into her life would, you know, treat her in a certain manner. And in your mind, when you go through bad things and you go through situations where things hurt you, you end up believing that your emotions and what it's telling you to like not get in those situations again are the right thing to do. And that takes away everything that the devil actually wants to take away from you. He wants you to not have faith in a better tomorrow. Because ultimately, what are we trying to do when we're trying to be better high achievers? We're trying to have a better tomorrow than we have today. We're trying to be better tomorrow than what we are today. So if we are losing faith and losing the sight that just because something bad happened, it doesn't mean that something bad is going to happen again. If you have faith and you do better and you learn, it doesn't mean that you should sit around and wallow and be pessimistic about a situation. And, you know, there's obviously a boundary where if you've been in a bad situation, you should probably figure out how to better sort through people, of course, but you don't want to sit around and just let the emotions that come up because of the bad things that you've been through limit the things that you can accomplish tomorrow because of what bad things happened to you yesterday. So really sit around and understand that your emotions are just a reaction to your thoughts, but you can't always trust your emotions, because sometimes the things that hurt us the most cause us to overreact, and we overcorrect the things that we really should just think critically about for a second, remove the emotion from it, and go ahead and move forward. So the last and most important thing I said I was going to get to that will truly trick you and the devil uses to trick you is actually connections. So hear me out. You look back into the 1900s per se, let's say the 1900s, and you realize that in the 1900s they weren't as connected as we are today in 2024. We are able to connect with just about anybody online, and due to that we see a lot of things. Like, you have people online who present themselves in these perfect ways, and they, make everything in life look perfect so that you can compare yourself to them subconsciously. It's not always conscious. Remember that your conscious brain, what you actually can think of in the moment and pay attention to, it can only take in so much information. It's actually our subconscious brain that, controls most things, like your breathing and all the other stuff that you don't have to think about doing. Your subconscious brain can control a lot, while your conscious can only think about a little bit of a few things. But just understand, the reason I'm explaining that is because once I found that out, I realized that ultimately you can end up in a really, really bad place if you end up too connected with people who aren't important to you in your life. So if you're online and, let's say you're in a relationship and you and your partner are both scrolling social media, you're not even with each other, but you're scrolling social media, your girlfriend or your boyfriend or whoever is seeing these videos of relationships that seem so happy, and these little off moments that seem beautiful, and she wants those relationship moments with you, and she starts to kind of compare, and it dumbs down what you guys already have. Because when you're showing your highlight reel and actually comparing someone else's highlight reel to your real life, it really does make everyone's life seem terrible. And the way the devil will try to trick you is this: the devil will try to trick you by using comparison, like he did in the garden. What he did was, instead of focusing on the benefits that came along with being in the garden with, everything, abundance, they had everything was for them. What he did was he focused on the lack of. He didn't sit around and say, oh man, y'all do have everything in the world, that's amazing, this sounds like something I would want. No. He focused on the lack of. The lack of the knowledge of good and evil. And the issue is with connection is that consciously you may think things are fine. And consciously you may be fine. But everyone falls prey to this at one point or another. We compare in order to measure and in order to grow. And the easiest way for us to compare is to look around and see what others have and see, how did they got that? Why don't I have it? Am I doing something wrong? And especially as a high achiever, we're super prone to this. So that connection we feel like we have on social media, all the things that we like that seem so cool and we wish we had, and that wanting for things that are focused on the lack of what you don't have, can really let the devil trick you and lead you on that path back to the beginning where we talked about, now that he's tricked you and made you focus on the lack of, he ended up taking you away from what you actually had. It made you think short term, because long term you're growing. You focused on gaining new information. You're focused on the long term perspective of your growth, because you're somebody's, blessing that they're living in is your blessing for tomorrow, but you just haven't reached that yet. So you want to really make sure that you don't let the devil trick you by making it seem like that person that you're connected with that has something you don't have is something that you need right now. Because ultimately you are blessed in ways that a lot of people aren't. So don't let the lack of lead you to thinking short term, and then once you think short term and your emotions and that emotion you get when you think about the fact that this person has something cool that you actually want, don't let that emotion trick you into taking these short term, routes of doing things and not focusing in the right ways that God set there for us to focus on. Have faith. Make sure we're focused long term. Leave that inheritance. Make sure that we actually don't compare. And we actually focus on the blessings we do have, because ultimately all of us are blessed in ways that somebody else isn't. And if we can really get that through our head, the devil can't trick us anymore. And that's something I had to find out for myself, and I'm constantly working on and helping the people I mentor and things like that learn and work on as well. So if you're a young high achiever looking to learn more about self-improvement, business, psychology, and investing, definitely DM me on Instagram at It's Kuye, ITSKUYE, and subscribe to my newsletter in the bio. And if you DM me on Instagram, I do free calls. So yeah, definitely reach out to me. I love talking to people and just helping them out in any way I can. Peace.